Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm chatting with Rick Rule. In today's interview, we get into the recent news that Canada is entering an election season, what Mark Carney could mean for Canadians, and how to sort of assess all this Donald Trump stuff. I also ask Rick about two names that I really like and have been vocal about liking, which, if you watch to the very end of the interview, Rick gives me his thoughts on those companies. All right, everybody, enjoy the interview. Rick, it's good to see you again.
Steve, a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me back.
So there's been a lot that's happened since the last time we spoke. We've got a U.S. president who isn't afraid to change the way things are done in terms of international trade. And as Jordan Peterson put it on a podcast I watched the other day, the international, I think he referred to it as the international social agreement or social contract. A bit of a intellectual word, I guess. But now in Canada, we're entering an election cycle, and I think that this is just a really fascinating one because we look at what's happened over the last decade of Trudeau. Objectively, it's been a disaster from an economic standpoint. Uh, Originally, we started out in the polls. If you just go back a couple of months, the Liberals looked dead. Now, all of a sudden, they swung back up. Kind of reminds me of a recent election that you guys had in the US. Now, I know you are vocal about even Canadian politics on Twitter, so I gotta ask you, what's your read on this? Are we being harassed? What do you think's happening?
Well, it's really interesting. I'm not a Canadian voter, as you know, although I've paid a lot of tax in Canada, so in some senses I feel entitled to comment, and I would anyway. Uh, Poilievre ran an anti-Trudeau campaign for 3 years, and when Trudeau resigned, his campaign went away. It went to campaign heaven. It's interesting that Carney, the power behind the throne for the last decade, is running on a campaign of change. That says a lot for the government that he constructed for 10 years. Um, it's very interesting. If I were Carney, first of all, I would go someplace that was sacred to me in my backyard, and I would build a temple to Trump because really, truly, the Liberals are running against Trump. And that's very fertile ground in Canada. One needs to remember, particularly those in Western Canada, that what I call the consolidated left in Canada, the Liberals, the NDP, the Greens, and the Bloc Québécois, repeatedly garner between 60 and 62% of the vote. So anybody who hopes to upset at least a minority government of the consolidated left needs to win the aspiring part of the Laurentians of Ontario and Quebec. And I think that part of Canada has a pathological dislike for Trump's rhetoric. Carney is just an extremely lucky human being.
Yep.
He is apparently against what Canada's really good at,
Mhm.
which is to say the production and sale of hydrocarbons. Yes, he has temporarily scrapped the carbon tax because he wants to win the election. But you'll notice it wasn't done by Parliament. It was suspended by Carney. One wonders if he wins the election, whether he will simply then reinstate it. Let people get used to it for 5 years. From my point of view, the increasing politicization of both the United States and Canada is a bad thing. I would prefer that government was very small and very unobtrusive, and that people like you and me went about our business and negotiated contracts that were to the benefit of both. That's not what government exists to do. Government exists to coerce, it exists to force, it exists to extort, it exists to redistribute. And we are in a period in both countries where, unfortunately, government is becoming larger and more forceful. And the citizenry believes in the legitimacy of using the government to enforce their own ends on other people. From my own point of view, an extremely unpleasant circumstance in both countries.
And I've got a few questions to follow up on that, but I just want to stick on this topic of the Canadian election because I find it super fascinating, and I'll talk about a conversation I had with my mom recently. Who I hate to throw her under the bus. Thankfully, I don't think she watches any of my content, although I might find out that she does. Um, we were having a conversation, and I was just sort of talking about how I think that Carney is very dangerous. Just his background. Uh, he seems like the kind of guy who's in it for Mark Carney and Mark Carney's friends. And my mom just couldn't get herself over the fact that Poilievre supported the truckers, and which I know that to people who invest in commodities, often from out west, they think that that's like some kind of radical thing, but that's the way people think in generally in big cities in Canada, certainly in the Greater Toronto area, which is where I am. And it just kind of makes me think that when it comes down to politics, we can have as much of a detailed, thoughtful conversation as we want. But when it comes down to voters, they're really not that informed. They're really not that thoughtful. And what ultimately it boils down to is just a couple of simple things. And the one thing I'm wondering about when it comes to Pierre is that with people like my mom, she hates Trump. She hates him. She's hated him for years. And this is a very common Canadian boomer mindset. I'm wondering if Pierre, the best course of action he can take is to just come out and just basically guns a-blazing against Trump to try to convince these people in the center that he's not Trump. You think that that's a wise strategy?
It could be. People are usually focused on things that are irrelevant.
Yeah.
Uh, Neither Pierre nor Carney are running against Trump, although Carney is doing his very best to be running against Trump.
Yeah.
Trump's rhetoric is offensive. Well, it's offensive to me, but it's also offensive to the consolidated left. But you need to remember that government exists on the fact that people feel as opposed to think.
Mhm.
But people thought. The idea that there's an entity that takes a third of their earnings, wastes half, and gives a little bit back and asks you to be grateful is not a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think voters need to dial back and remember the great words from the American journalist H.L. Mencken, who said, quote, "The voters usually get what they want, most often good and hard." And to the extent that Canadian voters elect Mr. Carney, I'm afraid that they're going to get what they want, good and hard. There won't be a business case for the industry that Canada is most efficient at on a global basis, which is to say the production and sale of hydrocarbons.
Yeah.
Um, the reason why it is, I wouldn't say easy, the reason that Trump has a chance to hold to hold Canada hostage on the tariffs is because Prime Minister Trudeau and his government never found a business case for exporting Canadian gas. You only have one customer for your best export. Uh, Contrary to popular opinion, Mr. Trudeau forgot to balance the budget. The consequence of forgetting to balance the budget, budget didn't balance itself, and obviating export markets like Germany and Japan that were begging Canadian natural gas means that Trump can threaten Canadians by imposing taxes on Americans. By the way, tariffs are taxes.
Yeah.
And Canada has much less recourse than it would have had it conducted the affairs of the country intelligently for the last 10 years. If there were vibrant export markets for Canadian natural gas into Korea, into Japan, into China, into France, into Germany, uh, the economy of Canada would be such that whoever the next leader is could say to Mr. Trump, "Go your best lick, pal." You know, "We don't need you. You know, we need you like a fish needs a chicken." But that isn't what happened. And so that isn't what's happening.
But what's the solution from here? I mean, I
I don't
we've
think
got
there
shot.
I don't think there is one. I mean, if you're talking about the solution to Trump, I don't know what solution you're talking to. If you're talking about the solution to Trump, just wait a while. Uh, Nobody wins picking 50 or 60 fights simultaneously. And he's decided to take on the whole world, including at least half of the United States. Wait 2 years, and you will find the outcome of the Trump revolution. You can't win 50 fights. If the question that you're talking about is Canada, that's a very different circumstance. And I suspect, given the power of rhetoric in Canadian politics, that Carney is likely your next prime minister. And if that's the case, you're going to have to wait that out too. The politician, uh, despite the ink that Trump gets in Canada, and I hope your listeners take this to heart, the most dangerous politician is the one that's closest to you. Mr. Trump can't make you the 51st state, and all he's doing is being obnoxious to play the part of his base. This is a non-starter. He can put in place tariffs, but tariffs are taxes, and they will ultimately be very, very, very hostile to Americans who have to pay more for Canadian products that they want to consume. I mean, make no mistake, tariffs are taxes. Canada's not going to pay the tariffs. American citizens are, and they're not going to like it. So you're going to have to endure 2 years of this guy. The problem is that you're likely to have to endure 5 years of Carney, and Carney will be front and center. Trump can't charge you a tax. Trump can't subject you to any idiotic regulation. Trump can't cast your defense budget or orient your foreign policies. Carney can do all that. That's who you really need to be afraid of.
Okay, so one of the campaigns that the Liberals are really running with right now is this whole elbows up campaign. And I don't know if you've seen this. We had Mark Carney and Mike Myers. They did a commercial. Two guys that haven't lived in Canada for the last decade. Mike Myers for the last number of decades. He's talking about how it's elbows up time. We gotta fight back. And when I see the people that are the most vocal towards the concept of elbows up, I notice that, okay, we got two guys who really don't have a lot of skin in the game when it comes to the economy. I mean, as far as I could tell, Carney's just here to take advantage of it. That's my view. I'll be clear on that. Mike Myers lives in the U.S. It doesn't sound like he's coming back to Canada, so I don't even know why he's coming here and interfering. And then we look at the polls. The Liberals are doing best with boomers who have paid off their houses and are reaping the rewards of old age security, CPP, and cheap healthcare. So they don't have a lot of skin in the game. But take somebody like myself here. I'm 42 years old. I'm staring at what could be a lost decade for what should be my prime earning years. And all these people are telling me, elbows up, Steve, elbows up. Can I go to that factory in Langley, BC that just lost 170 employees to North Carolina and tell their union boss, elbows up? And I just got to think about it. I'm like, can we win a trade war? Is that the idea behind elbows up? And
There's not going to be a trade war. The idea behind elbows up is that the Liberals can't run their track record. They have to run against Trump. Elbows up is a way of distracting you from the fact that they've wrecked your economy over 10 years. Listen, we haven't done a great job in the U.S. over the last 15 years, and we've outpaced Canada by 50%. I mean, losing to a mediocre competitor is not a good thing. Elbows up is all about the fact that they have to distract Canadians from the terrible job that they've done running the Canadian economy. That's all it is. They are very, very, very lucky. The meteoric rise in the polls that the Liberals have enjoyed have to do with the fact the Liberal rhetoric is popular. The Liberal performance has been catastrophic. Elbows up is all about the fact, no, we didn't balance the budget. No, we raised taxes. No, we did wreck the economy, but we're not Trump. It's hilarious. It's hilarious to me that it works because I don't live there.
it's geared towards the low information voter. So let's take a look here at you mentioned the US hasn't done so great over the last 15 years, and we kind of look at it right now. The US is planning to spend $7 trillion in the next year while bringing in $5 trillion in revenue. So and it's like it's gotten way worse ever since COVID. The deficit just got ballooned, and it hasn't really worked its way back to anywhere close to those pre-COVID levels. Now, I know a talking point that I've I've heard you say to me multiple times, and I've seen you say it on Twitter, is this $100 trillion of off balance sheet or unfunded liabilities that nobody seems to want to talk about. And it's true, uh, but it seems like the majority of that is military spending, old age security, and basically healthcare bills given to people who are 65 plus. And speaking about the U.S. specifically, you think that that's something that they can actually tackle, or do you think it's just going to take an economic disaster to be able to slash any of these things?
Oh, we'll get through it the way we did in the '70s. We'll get through it rather than by an honest default, a dishonest default. And let's define it for a second. That $100 trillion represents the net present value of unfunded promises. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the Environmental Trust Fund, federal government pensions, military pensions, and the obligations of the Federal Pension Guarantee Board. These are specific promises that have been made to specific beneficiaries, all of whom vote. If your young 42-year audience is trying to visualize this, they should look at me, 72 years old. I get Medicare. I'm on Social Security. They have promised me this, and if I were a different Rick Rule, I would probably feel entitled. I have been paying into Social Security now for 60 years. The fact that I'm entitled to it doesn't matter if it's not available. Now, what I think happens is, first of all, that we play around the edges. We scrap the cap on Social Security taxes. Right now, above $160,000, you don't pay your 6.2% a year. So I think they scrapped the cap, which is to say, rich guys like me pay on all their income. The second thing they do is they acknowledge that it's theft, that it's a transfer program. And despite the fact that they scrap the tax, they means test Social Security. In other words, I pay, but I don't get. Then they do something they should have done a long time ago. This will be highly unpopular, but I think they have to do it. I think they have to raise the eligibility age. People live longer.
Yep.
When Social Security was instituted in the United States, it began, by the way, with poverty level subsistence at age 65, and the average life expectancy of an American male was 66 years. And there were many more active young workers than there were recipients. So they have to play around the edges, but that's not enough. Repeat again, the net present value, not the nominal value, the net present value, discounted value of unfunded promises is $100 trillion. If you put the on-balance sheet liabilities of the U.S. government on top of that, which is $30 trillion net of the Fed's own balance sheet, the federal government, or rather, our federal government, the U.S. federal government, owes $130 trillion. Put that in perspective. The IRS suggests that the aggregate private wealth in the United States, all the wealth that's privately held, is $141 trillion. So as a country, we're worth less than 10% on top of what we owe. Now, here's how they deal with it, actually. They honor the nominal value of the obligation. Some old geezer like me, maybe not a rich geezer, a middle-class geezer, who's supposed to get $4,000 a month, continues to get it. But they depreciate the purchasing power of the U.S. dollars, and they don't index tax for inflation. In the decade of the 1970s, Steve, the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar, according to the Office of Management and Budget, declined by 75%. So this old geezer will still get $4,000, but it'll buy $1,000 worth of goods and services. That's how they'll get out of it. By the way, in the decade of the 70s, the last time we did this, you're too young to know, but the U.S. fought the war on poverty, which we lost. And we fought the war in Vietnam, which we also lost. And there was a hangover from that. So we reduced the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar by 75%. And not coincidentally, the gold price went up 30-fold. I'm not suggesting it's going to go up 30-fold. This time it's going up from a much higher non-price controlled base. But the practical part of the discussion that we're having is that the politics of the deficit is that you extend and pretend. And the reality for your own portfolio is if you reduce the purchasing power of the US dollar, not relative to other currencies, by the way, but in the aggregate, if past is prologue, gold does well.
Yeah, you think about it high level, just the way you framed it. $130 trillion of debt in terms of net present value in an economy that's negative cash flow, $2 trillion a year.
No, 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 no. Wrong. 4. 2 on balance sheet, 2 off balance
Correct.
sheet. That $100 trillion is growing by $2 trillion a year. Everybody focuses on the on balance sheet liabilities because the off balance sheet liabilities are too catastrophic to think about. But when you say 2, that's wrong. It's
That's because you're adding that in terms of the
You have
present
to.
values.
You have to. Or else you have to be honest and say to old folks, too bad, so sad,
Like,
you paid in and we stole the money.
it it doesn't sound like just a little bit of austerity on some of the middle income people in terms of old age security is going to fix that. Like when we frame it that way, $130 trillion of liabilities in an economy that's losing $4 trillion a year. Basically, the only way to get out of that is to basically inflate your way out.
It would seem that way to me. This experiment that we're having right now, the Department of Government Efficiency,
Mhm.
I remember from my youth, it was called the Reagan Revolution. There's a wonderful book called The Triumph of Politics by David Stockman. David Stockman was the director of the Office of Management and Budget in the Reagan years. And he talked about the fact, and by the way, Reagan had a mandate for smaller government. He didn't win by an eyelash like Trump did. Reagan had a broad mandate for smaller government. And the politicians, Republican and Democrat in Congress, derailed the Reagan Revolution within 6 months. The same David Stockman, who wrote The Triumph of Politics, who witnessed that, just wrote another book called How to Really Cut $2 trillion out of government. And it's wonderful reading. And it will be a very interesting experience. My own inclination with politics, yours and ours, is to ignore the rhetoric and look at the numbers. The Republicans just passed a continuing resolution to raise the debt ceiling. They ran one of the largest quarterly deficits in history. Does that sound like cutting government to you? They talk cutting government. If Mr. Musk had found all this fraud, where are the charges? Who's being charged? There's nobody that's been charged with this fraud that they're suggesting runs to the trillions of dollars. The truth is that Trump and Carney are different sides of the same beast. They're people that aggregate political power by spouting populist rhetoric. There's no reality in the numbers on either side of the border.
It makes for good headlines though, right? Like when you announce that USAID is gonna cut, $500,000 grant for a transgender opera in Ireland, that makes for a nice headline. But we also have Elon's group of companies receiving more money in subsidies from the US government than he's even cut in terms of confirmed USAID.
Agreed. Agreed. On both sides of the border. Remember Mr. Trudeau saying the budget will balance itself. When? How? As I said, this will make me highly unpopular. I used to talk about the 2 Ts, the terrible Ts, Trump and Trudeau. Now we have Trump and carnage.
Carnage, I like that.
They're, in truth, caricatures, manifestations of the same tendency. And people, unfortunately, don't like math. They don't like arithmetic. They like rhetoric that they can identify with. They like to see a preponderance of lawn signs with political parties' colors that are convenient and comforting to them. People don't like budgets. Now, Carney, unfortunately, is really good at budgets. He's a very, very, very smart guy. Think of him as a competent Trudeau,
Mhm.
which would have to be extremely scary. if somebody is trying to do harm to you, you would prefer that they were incompetent as opposed to competent. I understand that that goes contrary to the way that most people think about politics. And the truth is, the only thing that really comforts me about Trump, believe me, I'm not comfortable with him, is the fact that he's picked 200 fights. If he picked 1 or 2 fights, he would be extremely dangerous, but he's gonna punch himself out in a couple of years, which means he's gonna be less bad to me than were he actually successful.
I still though, I just and I know we probably talked about politics more than we intended to here, but I look at Carney and he's never actually won an election, right? Like he won the Liberal one, but like they were kicking people out. Nobody was really running against them. He was kind of the handpicked guy. And then I don't know if you saw the soundbite recently, but Rosemary Barton, who generally like was considered a pretty left wing reporter, asked Carney about disclosing his assets, and she said it seems hard to believe that there's no conflicts of interest, and he basically tore her apart for asking the question. And I think that as we get deeper into this election, he can't help himself. He's not disciplined. He like Poilievre's he's been preparing for this moment his whole life. He's very disciplined, knows how to be strategic. I think that Carney's going to go off script and he's going to say things that's going to get him in a lot of trouble. So I'm looking forward to that, and I still have a lot of hope here that Poilievre's going to be able to pull it off. Not that I think he's like the greatest solution in the world, but he's a heck of a lot better than the man who's responsible for, well, the party that's responsible for a 40% decline in GDP per capita over the last 10 years.
I absolutely agree with you. I hope you're right about, Mr. Carney's lack of campaign skills and his ability to self-destruct. I think that would be wonderful. I don't know very much about Poilievre myself. I have met and become personally friendly with Maxime Bernier, who I have a lot of time for. I'm not sure that I have much of an opinion as to the probability that he could do anything other than derail Poilievre. And I hope you're right about Carney's ability to self-destruct. My own planning is that just the same way I have to endure 4 years of Trump, I probably have to endure 5 years of Carney. I'd love to be wrong.
Well, I let's hope that my suspicions are right. So, I've taken up a lot of your time here just talking about politics. We got to talk some resources for a minute. I got two names that I wanted to ask you about, um, in terms of just stock analysis, because I know you're always kind enough to give your thoughts, and I saw you did like 100 names for Triangle Investor, so I figure I got a right to ask you about a couple of them. One name that I've taken a liking to that I got to chat with at your last conference, which I believe you guys are doing again this year in July in Boca Raton, which for anybody in our audience who is interested, we'll put a link down below for how you can sign up for that. An absolute great time. We're planning to attend this year. But the one company that I walked away and just was really, really fascinated by, and just I think is the most exciting project in the world. And you probably know where I'm going with this is Seabridge, the KSM project. So they were at your conference. I'm assuming you're long the name. What's your thoughts on Seabridge?
I've known Rudy Frank for a very long time. In fact, I competed with him to buy KSM years ago. He
Okay.
won, I lost, and I became an investor of his in the process of getting beat. KSM is one of the largest undeveloped gold deposits in the world, if not the largest undeveloped gold deposit in the world, somewhere between 130 and 100, pardon me, 120 and 140 million ounces. The difficulty is it's fairly remote, and it's quite low grade. I don't know the gold price it requires. Rudy is smart enough to know that it's going to be between $8 and $10 billion to build it. That's not Canadian dollars, it's US dollars. Which means he needs to partner it with a big company, and he's playing chicken with the big companies. With the gold price above $3,000, this project may be flirting with true economics.
Yeah. And
Uh,
and it's gonna look good on the investor deck of one of those majors to be able to add all that resource.
the difficulty with it is going to be it is so large that the return on capital employed on a time value basis is going to be a challenge. That's going to be your that's going to be your difficulty. The um, life of mine all-in sustaining cost, I suspect, can be fairly low, but the upfront capital cost is going to be fairly high. Let's assume that you're amortizing $10 billion at an 8% interest rate, which is low. That's $800 million a year that comes off the net present value. That's going to be your challenge. If the gold price goes high, the way I think the gold price is going to go, in other words, if gold maintains its nominal value against a US dollar whose purchasing power declines by 75% over 10 years, that suggests merely arithmetically that the gold price 10 years from now is 4 times the price it is today. I know people hate arithmetic, but I always default to it. If you start using a $7,000 gold handle or an $8,000 gold handle or a $10,000 gold handle, this project becomes a must-build project. So we'll have to see. If you want optionality to the gold price, in other words, if you want to buy a stock that, if gold goes down, costs you a lot, but if gold goes up, makes you an awful lot, this is the poster boy for it. I should say one other thing about Seabridge that must be noted for Canadians. Their relationship with their host community is pretty good. If I was going to build a mine anywhere in British Columbia, well, let's do it differently. I wouldn't build a mine anywhere in British Columbia, probably, that wasn't in Tahltan territory. The First Nations there are wonderful hosts and partners if they're treated right. And Seabridge and Rudy Frank have come to know them over time. That isn't to say that the Tahltan will be pushovers. They will not. But they'll be fair. Unlike the government of Victoria, the government in Telegraph Creek, which is to say the Tahltans, are responsible, honest, hardworking people.
So I've got another name I want to ask you about that I don't think you're long, and it seems to me like a name that you should be long. Um, they're also in the Golden Triangle, right across the bay from Dolly Varden, who my understanding is you're long, and that's Goliath Resources. It's not that long ago they announced almost a 35 gram per ton hole over 39 meters at the Gold Digger property, which I love the way that they name their properties over there. Eric Sprott's in this name. We have McEwen came in. We actually wrote a piece um, predicting that McEwen would hop in after they announced that hole because it felt a little bit great bearish to us. I'm curious, how come Rick Rule's not in this name?
I couldn't tie the holes together. I couldn't make a deposit out of it. We're doing some work on Goliath now. We're also, doing work on Treaty Creek. We're doing work on Tudor. We're long Skeena up there. I'm long a bit of Dolly Varden, although I sold enough to recoup my cost. I'm in for free now.
Okay.
So we're attracted to the whole area, and I'd love to get up there this summer because I'd love to revisit with the Tahltan who they believe are going to be the winners up there. Obviously, Red Chris is performing well. I want to get a local feel for what's going on. I've learned in my life, and I'm not criticizing Goliath, I've learned that one nice splashy drill hole, particularly if you accidentally or on purpose drill the thing down the seam, does not a mine make. You have to look at the plan view, you have to look at the mine view, you have to tie the drill holes together to make a deposit out of it. And we haven't done the work on Goliath yet.
What about this? What if you head down there this summer, if we meet you there, so we can film a little bit of video content and learn from Rick Rule himself?
In my youth, that would have been a good thing to do. I'm hoping to have discussions with the Tahltan,
Okay.
but they might prefer not to be public.
Got it. Okay. I tried, guys.
Absolutely.
All right, Rick. You've been very generous with your time here today. I've gone on longer than I'm supposed to. I always appreciate you hopping on here. For our audience, if they want more Rick Rule content, where can they go to?
Sure. I don't do public politics, but if you want to know what I know about natural resources, I'll make it easy for you. Go to my website, ruleinvestmentmedia.com. List your natural resource stocks. Goliath, Seabridge, whatever you want, but natural resources only. No pot stocks, no crypto, no tech stocks. And I'll rank them for free, 1 to 10, 1 being best, 10 being worst. I'll comment on individual issues if I think my comments might have value. Once again, ruleinvestmentmedia.com, list your natural resource stocks, I'll rank them for you. My purpose in doing this is to propagandize you to sign up for my boot camps, and also for the Natural Resources Investment Symposium. That is simply the finest natural resource conference in the world. It's the finest for 3 reasons. We have great speakers. I talked about David Stockman, the author of The Triumph of Politics. He'll be my political keynote speaker this time. We'll have absolutely great entrepreneurs, Randy Smallwoods of the world, the Robert Friedlands of the world, the Ross Beatties of the world, the Bob Quartermains of the world, people who have built multi-billion-dollar natural resource companies from scratch, talking to you about how they did it, the mistakes they've made, and how they can make you a better investment. More importantly, every single exhibitor there is owned in accounts put on by the conference sponsors. At every other investment conference I know of in the world, the qualification to be an exhibitor is a check that cashes. With us, we got to know you and love you. And finally, no other conference in the world does this. We have an absolute money-back guarantee. If you attend the conference live in Boca Raton or in the comfort and convenience of your own home via live stream, first of all, you'll have access to the recordings, which means that you can pay attention to the conference again and again and again, which you'll need to do. But secondly, you have an absolute money-back guarantee. If you think for any reason that I didn't earn the tuition I charged you, email me and I'll give you your money back. Riskless financial transaction.
All right. Well, Rick, as always, it's a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you at the conference, at the symposium in early July. I'm also a sucker for any conference in Florida, but more importantly, for anybody who's considering going, the companies that are there are second to none. You go to a lot of these conferences, there's a lot of companies that are just there. You just know that it's a dilution time bomb waiting for some sleazy former investment banker type to go in and just steal the cap table. None of that's happening at this conference. There's real companies with real assets. And typically when we sit down there to do interviews, we're talking to guys that are phenomenal on camera. So for us, it's a great source of content. So uh, Rick, I appreciate you hopping on here, and let's do this again sometime soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Also, let us know what you think in the comment section. Thanks for watching, everybody.